want to go into the Q&A portion. We've got some really interesting questions from the attendees. The first question from Adam Craggs is asked, is there any tips for already experienced candidates wanting to change sector?
Say that again, sorry, I missed, you cut out a little bit.
Do you have any tips for already experienced candidates who want to change sector?
It kind of depends on what sector it is. For the vast majority of sectors that you might work in, so say retail or financial services, the skills are reasonably interchangeable. You don't need to change much from a skills point of view. It's more around that domain knowledge. If anything, I'd probably try and build a couple of projects within that space, even if it's just you doing your best to try and understand some of the projects within there. You know, you're going to start understanding a little bit more about how the data exists in that part of the world, as well as the key metrics that are often being used. There are some areas which are a little bit different sometimes, like healthcare can be a little bit harder to transition into because there's some more specific differences. In terms of trying to impress a hiring manager, say, for example, in another area, I think two things. If you really want to try and build up your skills, then try and tackle a few projects, you know, in your spare time, which are in that area. But secondly, when you're showcasing your skills in an interview, the reality is, and this has been the same thing for me, whenever I've moved roles in my career, when I moved from Amazon to PlayStation, I'd never worked for a company in the area of gaming before. I had no idea about the data, you know, or the types of things they were doing. But the key thing is to showcase what you've done, but showcase that you've got a problem-solving system that could work on any or all problems that you get faced with. And the best way to try and do that is when you're talking about the things that you've done. So say you built a super high level example, you built a churn model which would go on to be part of a retention program because, you know, customers are leaving at a higher rate every month, for example. When you're going through exactly what you did and the types of models you used and the metrics you were dealing with, try to showcase each decision that you made along the way and justify why you made that decision. How did you weigh up the pros and cons of each decision that you made? Because what that shows a hiring manager is that you have a system in place that can just solve problems. The reality is you're never, very rarely, you're going to be in a position where you've solved the exact problems that the company you're applying for has. So you're going to have to go in and learn and understand the data a little bit more. But what you want to do is showcase that you have the ability to solve all problems with your system, not just I can solve this problem and this problem. Showcase how it is you understand, you know, when a tough decision comes your way about which model should I use or which metric should I rely on. Showcase how you think about that from the pros and cons from both a technical perspective as well as a business perspective as well. So what's the impact on the customer? What's the impact on, are there any ethical concerns around it? Just try to speak in a really clear way about how you solve problems, not necessarily just I've done this and I've done this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a really, the thing is with industry, changing sector, sometimes it doesn't, some organizations, will have a hardline preference for a certain sector, but within the data space, everything is transferable as a data scientist effectively. So if you are utilizing your skills to create insight, you could theoretically do that in any organization, but it can take some, from my experience working with data scientists in recruitment processes, it can take some, cajoling almost sometimes, and some, really trying to prove to the hiring manager at least maybe one person from one sector could add value from the other, and usually it's people who might not be technically adapt. They might be non-technical stakeholders, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience interviewing candidates at Amazon, for example, so Amazon have a really good hiring process, I think, but they specifically care less about the the specific things you've done in the past, and they really want to see they really want to see your problem solving mindset. They want to see that you've got a growth mindset, that you can learn new things well, that you can apply your skills to other problems that you may well have not encountered in the past. Just because somebody's done the exact thing that you need them to do doesn't mean that they're the best candidate for the role. So that's what I was kind of trying to get to with the more broad problem solving mindset, rather than just being worried about exactly what people have done.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll move to our next question. That's from Sam Hull. Hi, Sam. Hope you're well, mate. Sam said, appreciate you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you see the role of data scientists changing over the next 5 years or so, if at all?
I don't think it's going to change as much as you might read about. So the reason that a lot of articles on LinkedIn or on Medium get a lot of attention is because they're quite bold claims around where data science is going, but I don't think it's going to change too much. The tools and the tools may change a little bit as we go. The tools are sort of slightly more interchangeable, but the techniques that we're using and the human creativeness around solving problems that we deal with, that's not going to change. It's I almost I get asked the question around, auto ML, where, what's the impact of that going to be? Auto ML is great in terms of solving very kind of simple problems at scale, but it's not as good as a human by any stretch about taking on a new problem that's never been done before and understanding what the nuances from, the point of view of the customer, or the point of view of ethical concerns, or, other regulatory, considerations you need to make. I don't see data science going anywhere. I think that's a lot of what people have concerns about is, auto ML is going to take over data science, and data scientists aren't going to have jobs anymore. I do not see that happening. I see a parallel with self-driving cars. I mean, 5 years ago, we thought, self-driving cars are going to be, on the roads and taking over, and they're not, because there's so many other considerations that need to be met before a city can have self-driving cars everywhere. And I think it's the same sort of thing. There's so many other reliances on human intuition that a data scientist is still going to be super important in 5 years' time. I honestly don't know, what the changes in the tools are going to be. There is a lot more automation around processes. I mean, you look at some of the cloud providers, say take AWS, for example. If you look at some of the tools they're coming out with, like their one I was just playing around with earlier is the one which can extract text from PDF documents. And all it is it's just essentially an API. You just call it, send your document in, and it spits it out. All of the clever stuff's being done by them automatically. There's going to be more stuff like that, but I don't see data scientists being in less demand or anything like that.
Yeah, no, again, I agree. I think, my 10 years experience in recruitment, we started out recruiting for SaaS analysts. That was the de facto analytics SaaS EG professionals. And, plenty of those people we spoke to back then are now data scientists. It's just evolving, keeping abreast of new technologies and moving into that space. And if you've got that mathematical, statistical, operational research background, you should be able to do that. So yeah, the best advice from us as well is to make sure you guys just learn, keep learning, keep evolving. And I agree with you, Andy. I think there'll be data scientists are going to be relevant, 5, 10, 15 years time. This next question, just quickly going on. Tejasvani Sharma has asked, which entry-level projects can we add to our portfolio? Can you suggest some?
I tend to not try and suggest any specific ones to people, because what I've found with the students that I'm, working with in Data Science Infinity is the best projects are the ones that excite you or interest you, rather than just me telling you what project you should go and do. I think you should probably have, to start with, try and have a bit of variation. So you want something which is showcasing some coding ability. You want something which maybe is touching on machine learning. You want something which might have some data visualization. You want to sort of cover those bases, but don't think about it as, these are the projects I must have. Just try and find data sets or projects that excite you or are in fields that you want to progress into, and work away at it. It's like what I said during my talk. I think if you're motivated and passionate about something, you're going to do a much better job of it. You're going to be asking more questions. You're going to be sitting at the dinner table thinking about it. You're going to just generally do a better job. You're going to dig deeper into the data and dig deeper into the potential solutions to solve that problem. And that's where you really learn, because your brain's firing in the right way for that to stick with you. It's like when you think about learning, subjects at school, the ones that you find boring, they just don't stick with you. The ones that you find really interesting, you find that 10 years later, 15 years later, you still remember those little pieces of information. So I think it's the same thing. Find things that interest you. If it is a data set that you've got off Kaggle or wherever it may be, don't treat it as just what Kaggle treats it as, which is, here's some data, I need to get a classification accuracy score. So try and turn it into a hypothetical business problem. Even if it was the Titanic data set, for example, give it a business problem. Instead of predict who will survive the Titanic, think about it in terms of, a luxury shipping company is needing to understand the risk in the event of an incident, and then you go through and you can build the predictive model. Don't think about the result as I got an 89% classification accuracy. Think about, what could we do with that model? We could understand which groups of people are at risk in shipping incidents. Try and frame it in a business way, because then when you talk about it, they'll know that it's a made up data set, but they'll see that you're thinking in the way that a real world project exists, and you're more likely to get some traction with a hiring manager.
That's great. So we've got 3 more questions left. So we'll try and get through these as quickly as we can before we run out of time. The next question's from Sean Mackay. So he's asking, part of my current role is working with HR data, 20 years data set. Getting my teeth into this domain, it appears that HR analytics is an emerging thing. Are you seeing more uses of pure ML AI making hiring decisions, i.e. with minimal human intervention? Is this going to grow over in time? Is there anything we humans can do to mitigate, or would you say that resistance is futile?
I've personally not done a whole lot in the space of HR, so you're probably going to know a bit more about it than I am, but I hope not. I hope that we don't throw too much, machine learning and AI into hiring decisions. I've seen, there's been examples in the past. Amazon had a very famous one where they tried to use machine learning to scan through resumes and understand which candidates were best, and it ended up having quite a skew towards males over females. Even though they removed that piece of data, there were other contextual pieces of information which were basically predicting gender, and they ended up scrapping that. I've seen things where they're trying to, and I think this won't go very far. It was a year or 2 back where they wanted to do facial scanning during an interview, right, and try and use that. I personally think where data science and AI is evolving so fast in terms of the technical capabilities, but the amount of scrutiny which is coming from society in general on AI and the types of things that people are now seeing that AI can do is getting bigger as well. So I think there's going to be a bit of and there's starting to be a bit of a point where those two things clash, and there might be a little bit of a revolution in terms of, yes, we can do it, but should we do it? So I don't really know the answer to your question in terms of, is this going to continue in terms of HR? Maybe. I hope not. I hope that we can do clever things with AI and ML, but there are some areas where I just don't think it would be as effective as a human, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's got its place, but we're not seeing too much of an adoption of it with our client base from a candidate selection process. However, there is some good uses to it in regards to setting up actual interview processes and automating a lot of administrative things that you probably that waste a lot of time. But I'm not seeing too much for myself personally. But I'm sure it is relevant, like you said, with various companies and industry. We'll move on to the next question, which is from, go to the chat box. It's from Louise. Hi, Andrew. Would be curious to hear your thoughts about applying for roles you may not meet all the criteria for. Would you encourage this, or is it something you would avoid?
I would definitely apply. I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that you don't meet all of the criteria. So firstly, there are a lot of job descriptions which are just rubbish in terms of they list everything they can possibly think of in the world of data science and they just put them on the job description. And the reality of most of those things are probably not being used that much in the role. So therefore that's misleading. You might be the perfect candidate. You might have the skills that are actually required, but according to the job description, you may not. So definitely I would apply from that point of view. The other thing I would say is that there's generally speaking, there's not going to be a candidate which has everything that the job description wants. You know, there's no perfect candidate. You're going to be similar to most other candidates in terms of you've got most of those things, but maybe you've not used this particular tool or this particular programming language as much as some of the other candidates. So everyone's going to have some things they meet the criteria for and some they don't. Definitely apply for it. You may end up, you know, getting a rejection from it because they genuinely think that you are missing some of those skills. But what's the worst that can happen? Maybe they look through your resume or your CV and they say, oh, actually, there's some really interesting projects in there, and the way that she's explained how she's taken on this particular problem and the results that it had, that's really interesting. I'd love to know more, because at the end of the day, most skills within data science are somewhat interchangeable. That's kind of what Josh had mentioned before. So if you know R programming really, really well, and this role just knows Python, some people will say, oh, well, they don't have Python, so I'll disregard them. But you could still be the perfect person for that role. It might just take you a couple of weeks to transfer your knowledge from R to Python. It's the same with cloud platforms. You've used AWS a lot, but you've not used Azure. That shouldn't rule you out, because transferring that knowledge from one to the other takes a couple of weeks. But this is a role you're going to be in for several years. So I hope hiring managers are getting better at understanding what skills are interchangeable and what's maybe more of a, we need to draw the line through this candidate.
Yeah, 100%. If you are 75% there on a job spec, if you're looking at going, I've got that, I don't have that, and it's not an essential skill that's at the top 3-4 requirements, then apply. Always apply. And you put it right. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get told no, and if you're already unsure, then it might not be right for any. But always apply. And there's so many transferable skills you can use. And a lot of these job specs that are out there right now are wish lists. So, and they might not necessarily be written by the hiring manager as well too. So there might not be a technical understanding there. It might just be, right, I'm looking for this person. Give me all this. Go for it. So yeah, please do apply. Make our lives a lot easier as well too. But yeah, quickly moving on. Next question from Azam. Do recruiters look through GitHub links, portfolio, website links as supplementary info, or is it best to assume they don't have time for this and try to cover all the star details directly into a CV? One page can get quite tight for space.
Shall I leave that to you, Josh? That's a recruiter-specific question.
It is, yeah. I mean, I know what GitHub is. I do check it from time to time, but I'll be honest with you. You probably put the link in the CV. 100% do that, but I'd be lying to you to say every recruiter would be going on there and looking at that. That's quite specific. It's quite technical. What we're really looking for is literally what Andrew's went over. What you've done, when you've done it, and what the business application was, and what was the insight there as well too. Because the key ingredient to being a data scientist, in my opinion, is not just having the technical complexity to do this stuff like you're doing, this magical stuff, but it's to get people like me to understand that and get stakeholders to understand that as well too. So figure out that business impact. So please do put it in, because it does show that you're technically compliant. And everyone's got to GitHub as well too, but don't rely on it. Rely on your words and how you come across in the CV, in clear bullet points. Hopefully that helps. I've probably dodged the bullet there.
Yeah, I would say from an interviewer point of view, which I can speak to more. Obviously, I can't speak from the recruiter point of view, but I think it's the same in that you can't guarantee that people are going to look at your portfolio of projects. But you do want to make sure that if they do, they're in a really nice format. Like I said, make sure there's that summary at the very top, which gives all of the details in summarized fashion. So what was the problem you were solving? What was the final solution? And what was the result? Essentially what you'd have on your resume, probably in a little bit more detail in the project, but at the top, give them enough detail that they can see what it was you did, and if that tempts them to read a bit more, then awesome. But you've not lost them straight away by just as soon as they click on it, it's a Jupyter notebook full of code. If you've created yourself a portfolio of projects that you're really proud of, pick the ones for your portfolio. Don't have just everything. Make a portfolio which is quite concise. It has the things you're really proud of that you really want people to see. And then if you've not got a lot of real world experience, still put those as projects on your CV or your resume. Yeah. Do what I suggested in terms of have one sentence on what the problem was, one sentence on what you did, and one sentence what the result was. And even if you have to hypothesize what the impact might be or what it could be used for, just do that. And then people will see those. Maybe they see that and they go, that's really interesting because we're trying to do something in that space. And then they click on your GitHub link, they see what you've done. It's in a nice format. And then they go, cool, I wouldn't have picked this guy or this girl initially, but now I'm keen to talk to them. So it's kind of all about making probability work in your favor.
Yeah, definitely. I know we probably need to wrap this up. So I do have a quick question for myself to you, Andrew, and it's in relation, it might be relevant to yourself as well too, based off how we've worked with you in the past. Job title. Like, how important is job title? Because there's plenty of exceptional analysts out there who are doing data science work, but might not necessarily be, their job title might not necessarily be a data scientist. Is there any ways to highlight your experience as a data scientist or doing data science work on a CV that's going to gain attention from a hiring manager? Because in my experience, sometimes people might just look, oh, he's an analyst, or they're an analyst. They're not. They might have SQL or Python, but they might not be relevant. So, is there any tips you could give us there?
I suggest to people if you've done work which is data science work, as best as we can try and describe data science, it's a very broad area. But if you've done work that you believe is in the area of data science, and maybe you've never had a role which had the data scientist title to it, maybe you're looking to get into the field and you've not had a data title at all. Maybe you've just had a data analyst title, but not a data scientist title. My advice is at the top of your resume, put your name, and then underneath put data science / data analysis, or maybe even just data science. You're not claiming you've been a data scientist. You're saying, this is who I am and I do data science. You do. There's nothing to lie about there. But that will immediately, at least it'll mean that they look at it for an extra second or two and go, okay, that's not, because the reality is it's not a perfect world. In reality, recruiters and hiring managers would look through everybody's resumes in detail and then they'd take them out for a coffee and they'd have a nice chat with them, right? But that's not how it works. There's hundreds of people applying for roles and therefore it has to be a pretty quick scan through. Just put the word data science at the top of your CV. You're saying, I've done data science stuff, but I've not had a title of data scientist, but who cares? I'm doing it. And I also advise to people, don't think that a data scientist title is everything. Like Josh said, there are data analyst roles which are going to be far more exciting than a data scientist role. It's not everything to have a data scientist title. It doesn't mean that much. And another thing, data analyst roles can be easier to get because there's often less competition for them. Then you can get the data analyst role and there'll always be a data science team within that company and you can internally move there. And that's actually a really good avenue to take sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Nail on the head. Just one quick last question from Maria. She's asked, hi, where do you put the summary of your project on GitHub? In the read.me file or the Jupyter notebook or project? Hopefully I pronounced that right.
If it's just sitting on GitHub, I would try and put it in the README file because that is kind of the first thing that people see. Just make it very obvious that this is the summary of the project. Something I've done for Data Science Infinity just the other day was I've added a proper portfolio site, which is based on GitHub, but it's a proper portfolio website. So that makes it much easier for you to have that sort of summary section, and it makes it much more visually appealing. And that can help you with hiring managers when they do go and visit it, because often GitHub itself can be a bit of a labyrinth for people unless you've structured it really, really well. But yeah, the README file is the most obvious place. You could potentially, at the top of a Jupyter notebook, you could have that same information. Just make it what you want is, as soon as somebody clicks the link to that particular portfolio, to that particular project, you want them to see that summary of what it was you did. So because you basically don't want to lose them. You want to give them the information at a really summarized level, and then they can read further if they choose to.
Yeah, perfect. We are over just now, so we do need to end the session, I'm afraid. But thank you very much, everyone, for the participation and on the Q&A session. And hopefully you guys have had you can glean a lot of interest and information from Andrew's presentation. Andrew, thank you very much for your time today. Really insightful, and it's always a pleasure working with you and collaborating with you on this type of stuff. So hopefully we'll get to do that in the near future. Please do check social media and our websites for the next up and coming events. And we have got this recorded, guys, so we will be posting this very shortly as well too. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Josh.